What if everything you believed about your life, your family, and your very identity was built on a lie? Not a malicious lie, but one crafted from love, fear, and heartbreaking sacrifice. For Elara Vance, a 22-year-old waitress drowning in debt, the past was simple. Her mother was her hero, and her father was a tragic, romantic memory. But one rainy Tuesday night, a single, impossible glimpse into a billionaire's wallet would change everything. The face in that worn photograph wasn't just a stranger's keepsake. It was her mother's. And the truth behind it would unravel a story far more devastating and profound than she could ever have imagined. The clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversations at the Viridian were the soundtrack to Elara Vance's life. It was a world of crisp white tablecloths, gleaming crystal, and patrons who ordered $500 bottles of wine without blinking. For Elara, it was a world she served but could never belong to. At 22, her reality was a cramped studio apartment, instant ramen, and a mountain of student debt. For a community college degree she was too tired to finish. Her life was a relentless cycle of balancing trays, forcing smiles and reciting specials. The one thing that anchored her, the one pure and unshakable truth, was the memory of her mother, Clara. Clara had been a painter, a free spirit, who saw beauty in chipped teacups and rain-streaked windows. She had passed away from a sudden illness 5 years ago, leaving Elara with nothing but a box of faded sketches and a beautiful, tragic love story. The story as Elara knew it was her origin myth. Her father was a brilliant but penniless musician she had never met. He and Clara had shared a whirlwind bohemian romance before he died in a car accident just a month before Elara was born. Her mother had spoken of him with a sad, wistful smile, describing a love so perfect and complete that she never sought another. Tucked inside a small silver locket that never left her neck was Elara's only picture of her mother. A candid shot, her head thrown back in laughter, eyes sparkling with a joy so radiant it felt like sunshine captured on film. Tonight, the Viridian was buzzing. The man at table 7, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights, was the reason. Arthur Blackwood. His name was a fixture in financial news, a titan of industry whose net worth had more zeros than Elara's bank account had numbers. He was imposing with silver-streaked hair, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes that missed nothing. He dined alone, a rare occurrence that had the entire staff on edge. Elara's hands were steady as she refilled his water glass. He was engrossed in his phone, his thumb flicking impatiently across the screen. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice practiced and polite. He grunted a sound of dismissal before reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. For a moment, Elara thought he was preparing to pay and leave a welcome end to the tension. But he didn't pull out a credit card. He flipped the wallet open to a section with plastic sleeves. And then Elara's world stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. The polite smile froze on her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. There, under the soft ambient light of the restaurant, behind a thin layer of plastic, was a photograph. It was small, its edges slightly worn, the colors faded with time. But there was no mistaking it. It was her mother. The same photograph, the exact same candid shot from her locket. Head thrown back, laughing with that radiant, sun-drenched joy in her eyes. It was a picture Clara had said was taken by her father on a picnic the day he proposed. Time seemed to warp and bend. The clatter of the restaurant faded into a distant roar. All Elara could see was that impossible image in the hands of this cold, powerful billionaire. Why? How was it a copy? A coincidence, but the specific fading on the corner, the tiny crease near her mother's hand. It was identical. He was about to close the wallet. A primal, desperate instinct took over Elara's body. The years of training of being invisible and agreeable vanished. Her hand shot out, her fingers trembling as she pointed. Words tumbled out, raw and shaky. "Sir. Excuse me, sir." Arthur Blackwood looked up, his grey eyes annoyed, impatient. "What is it?" Elara swallowed, her throat dry as dust. She pointed again, more forcefully this time. "That photo. In your wallet." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable. Surprise anger crossed his features. He made a move to snap the wallet shut. "No, wait," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please, where did you get that picture?" He stared at her, his expression hardening into a mask of cold dismissal. "That is none of your concern, young lady. Now, if you'll excuse me." Her heart was breaking with a confusion so profound it felt like a physical blow. This man, this stranger, was walking around with the most precious piece of her mother's memory, a relic of a love story that defined her entire existence. She couldn't let it go. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and insistent. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The entire restaurant might as well have disappeared. It was just her, him, and the ghost in the photograph. "You don't understand. That photo, that's my mom." The declaration hung in the air between them, fragile and explosive. "That's my mom." For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Arthur Blackwood didn't move. His face, a moment ago, a fortress of cold indifference, was now a landscape of raw, unfiltered shock. The annoyance in his eyes was replaced by a deep, searching confusion. His gaze flickered from the photograph in his wallet to Elara's face, then back again. He seemed to be seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress, but as a person, a puzzle that had just been thrown at his feet. The manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Davies, began to scurry over his face, a mask of apology. "Mr. Blackwood, is there a problem? I am so sorry if my staff has disturbed you." Blackwood raised a hand, a gesture that stopped Mr. Davies in his tracks. He didn't take his eyes off Elara. Her own eyes were wide, pleading, shimmering with unshed tears. She looked so much like her. The shape of her jaw, the way her brow furrowed when she was distressed. It was like looking at a ghost. "What did you say your mother's name was?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously steady. "Clara," Elara choked out. "Clara Vance." The name struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders, but Elara saw it. He slowly, deliberately closed his wallet and placed it on the table. He looked at her again, and this time the billionaire titan was gone. In his place was a man looking at a spectre from a life he had buried long ago. "Leave us," he commanded Mr. Davies, his tone leaving no room for argument. The manager nodded nervously and retreated, shooting Elara a look that was equal parts terror and fury. She knew she was likely fired, but in that moment she didn't care. Arthur Blackwood gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request. Her legs felt like jelly as she numbly sank into the plush leather seat. She was on the other side of the table now, a customer in a restaurant she could never afford. It felt surreal. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. The cufflinks on his crisp shirt were solid gold. "Tell me about her," he said, his voice now softer laced with a pain that resonated deep in Ilara's own chest. "Tell me about Clara." And so she did. Through stilted sentences and shaky breaths, she told him everything. She told him about her mother's love for painting her small apartment, filled with the smell of turpentine and lavender, her infectious laugh. She told him about her sudden death 5 years ago, from an aneurysm that had shattered Ilara's world. And then, hesitantly, she told him the story. "She said my father was a musician," Ilara explained, twisting a napkin in her lap until it shredded. "She said they were madly in love, but that he was killed in an accident before I was born. She said he took that picture of her." As she spoke, Arthur Blackwood's expression grew more and more pained. A deep, sorrowful shadow fell over his features. He didn't interrupt, but the silence that followed her words was heavy with unspoken history. Finally he spoke, and his voice was rough with emotion. "The story she told you, it was not the truth." Ilara's heart seized. "What? No. My mother wouldn't lie to me." "She didn't lie, not entirely," he corrected gently. "She just omitted certain parts, and she changed the ending." He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "My name is Arthur. Your mother used to call me Artie. I was not a musician, Ilara, and I did not die in a car accident." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He reached across the table and slid a heavy embossed business card towards her. "I took that picture on a Sunday afternoon in Central Park 23 years ago." Ilara stared at the card. It read, "Arthur Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Holdings, Inc." Below it was an address for a skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and denial. "I don't understand," she whispered. "My mother. She loved my father. She mourned him her entire life." "She did love him," Arthur said, his voice thick with a strange mix of grief and certainty. "But the man she loved wasn't a poor musician. He was me." The foundations of Ilara's world began to crack. This man, this cold, calculating billionaire, was claiming to be the romantic, tragic hero of her mother's story. It was impossible. It felt like a desecration of her memory. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice gaining a sharp, defensive edge. He looked at her with an expression of profound sadness. "I don't expect you to. Not yet." He stood up, his towering presence seeming to fill the entire space. He placed several $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover his bill and the trouble she was undoubtedly in. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said, his gaze intense. 10 o'clock. I have things to show you. Things that will explain. It's time you knew the whole story, not just the one your mother wanted you to believe." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Ilara sitting alone at the table. His business card, a dead weight in her trembling hand. The truth, he'd said. But as she stared at his retreating back, a cold dread washed over her. She had a terrible feeling that the truth was not going to set her free. It was going to break her. The next morning, Ilara woke up feeling like she had been hit by a train. The confrontation at the restaurant played on a loop in her mind, a bizarre fever dream she couldn't escape. A text message from Mr. Davies confirmed her fears. "Don't bother coming in today, or ever." She was fired. Yet the loss of her job felt distant, insignificant. All that mattered was the heavy business card on her nightstand and the gaping hole that had been torn in her life's narrative. Was it possible? Could this billionaire, a man who represented everything her mother had seemingly rejected, be the long-lost love of her life? Dressed in her only presentable outfit, a simple black dress and worn-out flats, Elara felt like an imposter as she entered the lobby of Blackwood Holdings. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, echoing with the quiet, confident clicks of expensive shoes on polished marble. The air itself smelled of money and power. When she gave her name to the receptionist, the woman's eyes widened slightly before she directed her to the penthouse elevator with a newfound, almost fearful respect. The elevator ride was a silent, dizzying ascent into another world. The doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist office. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city below. A stern-looking woman with perfectly coiffed grey hair and an impeccably tailored suit stood to greet her. "Miss Vance, I am Beatrice Hayes, Blackwood's executive assistant. He is expecting you." Beatrice led her to a set of large oak doors and opened one, revealing Arthur Blackwood, standing by the window looking out at his kingdom. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. Today, in his own environment, he seemed even more powerful, more intimidating. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice softer than the night before. He gestured to a seating area with leather armchairs that probably cost more than her car. "Please, sit down." Elara sat on the edge of the cushion, her hands clenched in her lap. The silence was thick with 23 years of unanswered questions. "I know this is difficult to process," Arthur began, taking the seat opposite her. Clara was a remarkable woman. She was also fiercely protective and incredibly proud. He leaned over to a beautiful antique credenza and picked up a large leather-bound photo album. He placed it on the coffee table between them and opened it. Elara's breath hitched. The first page was filled with pictures of her mother. Not just the one from the wallet, but dozens. Clara on a sailboat, the wind whipping through her hair. Clara covered in paint, grinning mischievously at the camera. Clara and a much younger Arthur, his arms wrapped around her, both of them looking ever possibly happy, impossibly in love. In every photo she wore the same radiant smile. "We met at a small art gallery in Greenwich Village." Arthur said, his voice a low, nostalgic rumble. "I wasn't the man I am today. My family had money, yes, but I was trying to make my own way. I was investing in tech startups, a field my father considered little more than gambling. To everyone in my world, I was the rebellious son. To Clara, I was just Artie." He turned a page. There were photos of them at picnics, at concerts, on a trip to the coast. It was a life Elara had never imagined for her mother. "She knew about my family," he continued, "but she didn't care. She hated that world, the society dinners, the fake pleasantries. She called them gilded cages. All that mattered to us was what we had together." Elara felt a growing sense of dislocation. The man her mother described was a poor artist who shared her bohemian lifestyle. This story, backed by a mountain of photographic evidence, was entirely different. "Why?" Elara finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would she lie?" "She told me my father was dead." Arthur's face clouded with a deep, ancient pain. "Because in a way she needed him to be. Our relationship wasn't simple. My parents, they did not approve of Clara. They saw her as a distraction, someone from the wrong side of the tracks, who would derail my future. They put immense pressure on me to end it." "So you did?" Elara asked, a new bitter anger rising in her chest. You chose them over her. No, he said, his voice firm, his eyes locking with hers. I never did. I chose her. I asked her to marry me. He reached into a drawer in the credenza and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a simple but elegant engagement ring with a single perfect sapphire. This was her favorite stone, he said softly. The color of the sea. I gave this to her on that day in the park, the day I took that photograph. She said yes. Elara stared at the ring, her mind reeling. Engaged. Her mother had been engaged to Arthur Blackwood. This wasn't just a different story. It was a different universe. We were going to run away, Arthur explained, his voice thick with regret. Forget my family. Forget their money. We were going to move to California. She was going to open a gallery. I was going to continue with my investments on a smaller scale. We had it all planned. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if reliving the memory. And then one day, she was gone. Gone. Vanished, he said, opening his eyes again. They were filled with the haunting ghost of that loss. I came home to our apartment, and all her things were gone. There was a note. It just said, I'm sorry. I can't do this. Forget me. That was it. I searched for her for years. I hired private investigators, called every friend she had. It was like she had ceased to exist. I never knew why she left. I never knew. About you. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture Elara didn't want to see. The lie wasn't about a dead musician. The lie was about this man. Her mother hadn't been left behind. She had run away. I don't believe this, Elara said, shaking her head. The denial a desperate shield against the pain. She loved my father. She wouldn't have just left him. That's the part I've never understood, Arthur confessed, his voice breaking slightly. I thought she loved me too. He looked so lost, so broken in that moment, that for the first time Elara saw past the billionaire. She saw the arty from the photographs, the young man whose heart had been shattered. There has to be more to it, Elara insisted, more to herself than to him. There has to be a reason. She stood up abruptly, her body thrumming with a nervous, frantic energy. I have to go. She fled the office, ignoring Arthur's call of her name. She ran from the sterile lobby, from the oppressive wealth, from the story that threatened to erase the woman she thought she knew. She needed proof. Not his proof with his glossy photographs and expensive rings. She needed her mother's proof. Somewhere in the small apartment that was her last remaining link to Clara, there had to be an answer. The taxi ride back to her cramped apartment in Queens felt like a journey across dimensions. Elara stared unseeingly at the city rushing past the gleaming facade of Arthur Blackwood's world, giving way to the familiar grit of her own. His story echoed in her mind, a compelling, heart-breaking narrative that fought against the bedrock of her own history. She just vanished. I never knew why she left. The words were a torment. Could her mother, the woman who had taught her about loyalty and fierce love, truly have been so cruel? Could she have abandoned the man she supposedly loved without a real explanation? It didn't fit. It felt like a piece of the puzzle was still missing, a crucial piece that would make sense of the impossible. Her best friend and former co-worker, Liam, was waiting for her on the stoop of her building, holding 2 cups of coffee. His kind, worried face was a welcome sight in the chaos of her thoughts. "Hey," he said, gently, handing her a cup. "Mr. Davies called me. Said you had some kind of episode with Blackwood himself. I was worried. Are you okay? Elara just shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Leaning against the cool brick of the building, she told him everything. The photo, the confrontation, the surreal meeting in the penthouse office, the pictures, the engagement ring, the story of a love that didn't die but was abandoned. Liam listened patiently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was the most grounded person she knew, a rock of common sense in her turbulent life. Wow, he breathed when she finished. That's a Hollywood movie, not a Tuesday in Queens. He paused, studying her face. Do you believe him? I don't want to. Elara admitted, her voice trembling. To believe him means my mum. It means she lied to me my entire life. Not just a small lie, Liam. A huge one. She invented a whole person, a whole history for me. And it means she broke that man's heart for no reason. People don't do things for no reason, Liam said softly. Especially not big, life-altering things like that. If she left him, she had a reason. You just haven't found it yet. His words sparked something in her. A new resolve. Arthur had his version of the story. She needed to find her mother's. You're right, she said, her voice stronger now. She wiped her eyes and took a determined sip of coffee. She must have left something behind. A diary, a letter, anything. I've never really gone through all her old things. I just packed them up after she... You know. It was too painful. Then it's time, Liam said, giving her shoulder a supportive squeeze. Want some help? For the next several hours, her small apartment became an archaeological dig site. They pulled a large, dusty cardboard box labeled Clara's Memories from the back of her closet. It smelled of old paper and dried lavender. For 5 years, Elara had treated this box as a sacred tomb, too grief-stricken to disturb its contents. Now she opened it with a desperate, almost frantic need. Inside was a lifetime of carefully preserved fragments, bundles of sketches, mostly charcoal portraits of people on the subway, a collection of worn paperback poetry books, a dried corset, its petals crumbling to the touch. It was a treasure trove of the woman Elara knew. But there was nothing about Arthur. No photographs of the happy young couple from his album, no mention of Artie. It was as if that entire chapter of her life had been surgically removed. Maybe he was lying, Elara said, her hope flickering. Maybe he made it all up. A guy like that doesn't need to make up stories. Liam reasoned carefully, sifting through a stack of old utility bills. And those photos looked real. Discouragement began to set in. Elara sank back on her heels, the floor around her, littered with the ephemera of her mother's life. Had she been wrong? Was there nothing here to vindicate her mother, to explain the inexplicable? Her fingers brushed against the bottom of the box, feeling a false bottom, a slight ridge in the cardboard. Her heart leaped. With trembling hands, she worked her fingers under the edge and lifted. Beneath the main compartment was a hidden space, shallow and clearly meant to conceal. And inside there were letters. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon. A thick stack of them. The envelopes were addressed to Miss Clara Vance at an old New York address. Elara's hands shook as she picked up the top one. The handwriting on the envelope was bold and masculine. She pulled out the letter. It began, "My dearest Clara, I'm counting the minutes until I see you tonight. The city feels grey and empty without you in it. I walked past the gallery today and saw that ridiculous painting of the three-legged dog, and it made me laugh thinking of how you'd find some profound, beautiful meaning in it. You find beauty in everything. Mostly, I'm just writing this to say I love you. I'll love you tomorrow, and the day after that, and for every day after that. Forever and always. Yours, Artie. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She opened another, and then another. They were filled with passion, with inside jokes, with plans for a future that sounded bright and certain. They were beautiful, undeniable proof of a deep and profound love. This was him. This was the man her mother had loved. But then at the very bottom of the hidden compartment was something else. It wasn't a letter from him. It was a single folded piece of stationery, slightly yellowed with age. It was a draft. The handwriting, elegant and familiar, was her mother's. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It seemed to be a letter she had written, but never sent. With a sense of impending doom, Elara carefully unfolded the page. The truth she knew with a chilling certainty was right here in her hands. The paper was fragile in Elara's hands. The blue ink of her mother's pen, slightly faded, but perfectly clear. Liam sat beside her on the floor, a silent, supportive presence, sensing the gravity of the moment. The air in the small apartment was still and heavy, as if holding its breath. Elara began to read aloud, her voice soft and trembling. To my Artie, if you are ever reading this, it means I have failed. It means I was not strong enough to disappear completely, to become the ghost I need to be for you. I pray you never find it. I pray you hate me, that you curse my name, and move on to a life of happiness, the life you were born to live. It will be easier for you that way. Elara paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. This was not the beginning of a simple goodbye. This was a confession. I went to your parents' house today. You were in a meeting and I was going to surprise you with lunch. I let myself in the back gate, as I always do. I was on the terrace when I heard them talking. Your father and your mother. They were in the study, the window was open. They didn't know I was there. They were talking about us. About me. Your father called me a charming distraction. Artie, an unfortunate infatuation that you would eventually outgrow. Your mother was kinder, but her words hurt more. She said I was a sweet girl, but that I had no idea of the world I was trying to enter. That the pressure, the scrutiny, the expectations. She said it would crush a spirit like mine. That I would become a weight tied to your ankles, holding you back from your destiny. They weren't angry. They were just certain. They were planning my removal from your life as if I were a temporary piece of furniture. Liam reached out and placed a hand on Elara's arm. Her voice was shaking, but she continued reading, compelled to see it through to the end. I ran. I was going to come to you, to our apartment, and tell you we had to leave tonight, right now, to prove them wrong. But something they said stuck with me. Your mother said he thinks he can protect her from it, but he can't protect her from what our world will turn her into. And I realized she was right. I looked at myself, Artie. I love painting. I love messy hands and cheap wine and sleeping in until noon. Your world is one of charity galas and board meetings and calculated smiles. I would have to change. Bit by bit, I would have to sand down all my rough edges until I was smooth and polished and perfect enough to stand by your side. And I would hate you for it. Not at first, but one day I would look in the mirror and not recognize myself. and I would resent you for the cage you built for me, no matter how gilded its bars. I thought that was the most painful realization. But I was wrong. The most painful realization came an hour later. There's something I haven't told you yet. For the past 2 weeks, I've been feeling different. I went to a doctor this morning before I went to your parents' house. I wanted to be sure before I told you my wonderful, terrifying news. Elara's breath hitched. Her eyes scanned the next line, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. The world tilted on its axis. Artie, my love, we're going to have a baby. The word seemed to lift off the page and hang in the air, shimmering with the weight of 2 lost decades. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Liam let out a slow, quiet breath beside her. And that is why I have to leave. I cannot bring a child into that world. A child who would be seen as a half-breed, a scandal, a leverage point against their own father. A child who would have to fight for their grandparents' approval, who would be judged and measured from the day they were born. I grew up with nothing, but I grew up knowing I was wanted. I will not have my child, our child, feel like anything less. So I am running. I am creating a new story for our baby. A story where their father was a hero, a poor, simple man who would have loved them unconditionally, whose love for me was pure and uncomplicated by wealth or status. A man who was tragically taken from us, so there is no wound of abandonment, only a legacy of beautiful, perfect love. It is the kindest lie I can think of. Please don't look for me. Please live the incredible life you are meant to live. Be the titan they all know you can be. Find a good woman, a woman who belongs in your world, and be happy. Know that I will love you, and only you, until the day I die. You were not a chapter in my life, Artie. You were the whole book. Yours always, Clara. The letter ended. Elara slowly folded the fragile paper, her hands numb. The room was utterly silent save for the sound of her own ragged breathing. The truth, it was here, and it was so much worse than she had ever imagined. Her mother hadn't been a liar in the way Elara had feared. She hadn't been cruel or fickle. She had made an impossible, heartbreaking choice. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her one true love, to protect her unborn child. To protect Elara from a life she feared would destroy them both. She had constructed a beautiful myth to live in, because the reality was too painful to bear. The story of the dead hero father wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of fierce, desperate maternal love. And Arthur Blackwood, he wasn't a villain who had abandoned her mother. He was a victim, just as she was. He had lost the love of his life and the chance to know his own daughter because of a decision made from fear and love 23 years ago. They had all been living in the wreckage of that one terrible day. The tears that came now were not of anger or confusion. They were tears of profound, soul-deep sorrow. Sorrow for her mother's lonely life, for the love she gave up. Sorrow for Arthur, for the decades he'd spent wondering why. And sorrow for herself, for the father she never knew she had, and the truth that had just broken her heart into 1,000,000 pieces. Liam wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed, holding the devastating, beautiful, tragic truth of her mother's love in her hands. The rest of the day passed in a blur of grief. Elara didn't move from the floor, the unsent letter clutched in her hand like a sacred text. Liam stayed with her, making her tea. She didn't drink, and offering quiet comfort that barely penetrated the fog of her sorrow. Every memory of her mother was now cast in a new, tragic light. Her wistful smiles when talking about Elara's father were no longer signs of romantic mourning, but of a deep secret and abiding heartbreak for the man she had willingly left behind. The fierce independence Clara had instilled in her was not just a philosophy. It was a survival mechanism born from her own monumental sacrifice. Elara now understood the melancholy that had always clung to her mother like a faint perfume, the sadness in her eyes, even when she was laughing. Clara had been living with the ghost of Arthur Blackwood every single day. By morning, the storm of tears had passed, leaving an eerie, hollow calm. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in her chest, but it was now mingled with a new, urgent sense of purpose. 2 lives had been derailed by this secret. Arthur Blackwood deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know why. He deserved to know he had a daughter. She found his number on the business card he had given her. It felt like lifting a 100-pound weight to press the call button. Beatrice Hayes answered her voice as crisp and efficient as ever. "Mr. Blackwood's office." "It's Elara Vance," she said, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. "I need to see him. It's important." There was a slight pause. "Mr. Blackwood has cleared his schedule for you, Miss Vance. He said to let him know whenever you called. He can see you immediately." An hour later, Elara was back in the penthouse office. The view seemed less impressive today, the city below a muted grey. Arthur was standing by the window again, but this time he turned the moment she walked in. The question was etched on his face, a mixture of hope and dread. He had clearly been waiting in agony. Elara didn't say a word. She simply walked to the coffee table and placed the yellowed unsent letter upon its polished surface. He looked from the letter to her face, his expression confused. "I found this," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "It's from her. It's for you." His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the letter. He sat down heavily in the armchair and began to read. Elara watched as a lifetime of emotions played out across his face. Confusion turned to shock. Shock gave way to dawning, horrified understanding. By the time he reached the part about the baby, about her, a deep, guttural sound of anguish escaped his lips. The mask of the billionaire shattered completely, revealing the broken heart of the young man who had lost everything all those years ago. When he finished reading, he didn't move. He just stared at the letter, his shoulders slumped. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek and fell onto the page, mingling with ink that was already 23 years old. "All this time," he whispered, his voice ragged. "All these years, I thought she stopped loving me. I thought I had done something. I drove myself mad trying to figure out what I did wrong." "She never stopped loving you," Elara said softly, the words feeling both inadequate and essential. "She did this because she loved you. And me." He finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain so immense it was difficult to witness. It was the pain of 2 decades of unanswered questions, of a life not lived, of a daughter he never knew he had. "My parents," he said, his voice laced with a cold, quiet fury. "Their snobbery, their pride. They destroyed 3 Liffys with a single conversation they never knew she heard." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The irony is, I cut them out of my life 5 years after Clara left. I built this empire on my own terms, without their help, without their approval. I did it all to prove that I didn't need their world. But she was already gone. The silence in the room was vast, filled with the ghosts of what might have been. A father, a mother, a daughter, a family that never was. Arthur slowly stood up and walked over to her. He was no longer the imposing titan of industry. He looked old, tired, and profoundly sad. He stopped a few feet away, as if unsure of the protocol for meeting the 22-year-old stranger who was his child. "You have her eyes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The same foi, the same spirit." Elara felt a fresh wave of tears well up. For her entire life, she had been a Vance, a legacy of one. Now, standing before her, was a Blackwood, her father. The word felt clumsy and alien in her mind. "I don't know what to do now," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "I don't know what this means." "It means," he said, taking a hesitant step closer, "that we have 22 years to make up for. It means I am so sorry, Elara. So sorry for the life you should have had. So sorry for everything you and your mother went through alone." He opened his arms, a silent, uncertain invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Elara stepped into them. As her father's arms closed around her for the first time, she buried her face in his shoulder and finally let go of the last of her defenses. She cried. She cried for the mother she had lost, for the father she had just found, and for the beautiful, tragic story that was finally terribly complete. It was not a hug of celebration, but of shared, profound grief. A father and daughter united at last by a love that had cost them everything. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in navigating a new reality. There was no magical transformation, no grand cinematic moment where Elara's life of ramen and bus passes was suddenly swapped for one of caviar and chauffeured cars. The truth hadn't brought a fairy tale ending. It had unearthed a fragile, complicated, and utterly terrifying beginning. The chasm between Elara Vance, the waitress from Queens, and Elara Blackwood, the secret daughter of a billionaire, felt miles wide. Their first attempt to bridge it was a disaster. Arthur, in a well-intentioned but clumsy gesture, made a reservation at Aurelia, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost more than Elara's monthly rent. She sat stiffly in a dress she'd bought on clearance, feeling like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The waiters moved with silent, unnerving grace, and the clinking of their silverware seemed to echo in the cavernous, hushed dining room. "Mum would have hated this place," Elara said, breaking a long, uncomfortable silence. She'd say the food was trying too hard to be art, and the people were trying too hard to be important. Arthur flinched slightly at the comment, but then gave a sad, knowing smile. "You're right. She would have. She'd have made a joke about the foam on the sea bass looking like dish soap." He paused, looking at Elara across the expanse of white linen. "I forget sometimes how to be a person outside of a boardroom. For 20 years, this is how I've connected with people, through grand gestures, through transactions. I don't know any other way." "We have to find one," Elara said softly, but with a firm resolve that was pure Clara. "Because this isn't real. My life, the one she gave me, is real. The struggles are real. And you can't just erase them." This became their first, most significant hurdle. Arthur's instinct was to solve every problem with money. When he learned of her student debt, he immediately had Beatrice draw up the paperwork to clear it. Elara found the offer on her email the next morning and felt a surprising surge of anger. She called him, her voice trembling. "You don't get it," she said, pacing her tiny apartment. "That debt, I earned it. That degree I haven't finished, I worked for it. My mom worked 2 jobs, so I could even start. It's the story of my life. You can't just put a price on it and pay it off like it's an overdue invoice. You're trying to buy your way into my past, and it's not for sale." On the other end of the line, Arthur was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was humbled. "You are right. I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix the past, when I should be trying to build a future." It was the first of many lessons he would have to learn about his daughter. She did not want a benefactor. She wanted a father. Slowly they began to find a different rhythm. They abandoned the fancy restaurants for diners in her neighborhood, where Elara would watch amused as her billionaire father awkwardly navigated ordering a coffee that didn't have a fancy Italian name. They spent a Sunday walking through Greenwich Village, where he pointed out the small, now-defunct gallery, where he first saw Clara, the stoop of the apartment. They had shared the bench in Washington Square Park, where they'd spent hours talking. With every story, the ghost of the penniless musician faded, replaced by the solid, breathing reality of the man beside her, a man who was flawed, powerful, and more vulnerable than he let the world see. A pivotal moment came not from Arthur, but from his assistant. While waiting for him to finish an urgent call in his office, Beatrice Hayes brought Elara a cup of tea. For a moment, they sat in the quiet, professional silence that was Beatrice's domain. "He never gave up hope, you know," the older woman said, her stern facade softening for the first time. For the first 10 years, the private investigators were on a permanent retainer. He followed up on every lead, no matter how small. A woman with Clara's laugh reported in Ohio, a painter with her eyes seen in Oregon. He flew to both places himself. She sighed, looking towards Arthur's closed door. After a while, the search became quieter, but it never stopped. Every year on the anniversary of the day she left, he would cancel all his meetings and just sit in here with that photo album. He wasn't just grieving a lost love, Miss Vance. He was mourning a life he couldn't understand why he'd lost. Your mother's letter. It didn't just give him a daughter. It gave him peace. Beatrice's words were a gift. They confirmed from an objective source the depth of Arthur's love. He hadn't just moved on. He had been frozen in time, just as her mother had been. The following week, Arthur told her he had somewhere special to take her. The drive was quiet, filled with a nervous anticipation. He pulled up in front of a modest but elegant building downtown, a tastefully designed storefront with the name The Easel and Eye Gallery etched in the glass. "I bought this place about 10 years ago," he explained, turning off the engine. It was the first gallery that ever agreed to show one of Clara's paintings, back when she was just starting out. It was failing, so I bought it. I've kept it running ever since funding it anonymously. It's a non-profit now, dedicated to showcasing emerging local artists, the kind of people Clara would have championed. Elara's heart swelled. This was not a grand, empty gesture. This was a quiet, meaningful tribute, a way he had kept a part of her alive all these years. He led her inside. The gallery was bright and airy, filled with vibrant, challenging art that buzzed with raw talent. And there in the main atrium, in a place of singular honor, hung one painting. It was a large canvas, a chaotic and beautiful abstract seascape. Swirling violent strokes of deep navy and indigo crashed against hopeful slivers of emerald green and turquoise. In the distance, a tiny, almost imperceptible speck of white suggested a lone sailboat tossed on the tumultuous waves. It was breathtaking. It was her mother's soul rendered in oil and pigment. "It's the only original of hers I ever managed to find," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "I bought it at an auction years ago from a private collector. I had to outbid a museum for it." He gestured to the small brass plaque at the bottom of the frame. Elara leaned in to read the title. An Ocean Apart. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. That was it. That was the perfect, heartbreaking metaphor for her parents' story. The ocean of class and expectation that had separated them. The ocean of time they had lost. The ocean of secrets and lies her mother had constructed to keep her safe. And now the emotional ocean that she and her father were so carefully trying to cross one tentative conversation at a time. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time, they were not tears of sorrow alone. They were tears of understanding, of catharsis. In that single painting, she could see her mother's fierce passion, her terrible sacrifice, and her father's undying, patient devotion. It was the entire tragic story, told without a single word. "She knew you'd see it one day," Elara whispered, not entirely sure if she believed it, but needing to. "She knew you'd understand." Arthur didn't reply. He simply reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and sure. They stood there for a long time, a father and a daughter, no longer strangers, but survivors of the same shipwreck. The ocean between them was still vast, but for the first time in the quiet light of the gallery built by love and memory, they could finally see the opposite shore. Elara and Arthur's journey is just beginning. They can never get back the 22 years they lost, but they can build a future on the foundation of a truth that was in itself an act of profound love. Their story reminds us that life is rarely simple, that people make impossible choices for reasons we may never understand, and that the deepest wounds can often lead to the most unexpected healing. The lies we are told are not always meant to deceive, but sometimes to protect. If this story of a daughter's search, a mother's sacrifice, and a father's enduring love resonated with you, please let us know by hitting the like button. Share this video with friends and family who appreciate stories that capture the complexity of the human heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that explore the ties that bind us. In the comments below, tell us what you think the most difficult part of their new relationship will be. Thank you for listening.